Welcome to my podcast, The Sexual Shaman, Conversations on Sexuality and Spirituality. I am your host, Kenneth Ray Stubbs. This podcast-videocast series is inspired by a book I envisioned, contributed to, edited, and published 30 years ago, entitled Women of the Light, the New Sacred Prostitute. This current podcast-videocast is a series of conversations with both women and men of the light, all about sexuality and spirituality. We go into the topics of Western Tantra, Western sexology, orgasm, gender, Tibetan Buddhism, contemporary shamanism, and traditional shamanism. Basically, we focus on energy and transformation in all aspects of our lives. Here we openly support all sexual orientations, all genders, all gender identifications, all races, and all ethnicities. The sponsor of this podcast is my energy training, an extensive 20-course program in developing our energetic infrastructure and our shamanic abilities to transform ourselves and others. More information is available at sexualshaman.com. Welcome to the podcast-videocast, The Sexual Shaman, Conversations on Sexuality and Spirituality. I'm Kenneth Ray Stubbs. Today, I feel very fortunate in having as our guest Ohad Pele from Israel, based in Israel. He was a Kabbalist Rabbi in Jerusalem, and left that in form of organized religion to focus much more on the path of sacred sexuality, and he's author of several books on the topic of spirituality and sexuality from a kabbalistic perspective. And in the last 10 years, he and his partner, Don Cherie, have been leading as the lead faculty of ISTA, International School of Temple Arts. He teaches seminars on sexual shamanism worldwide. And one of the things we're going to focus on today is the information, the historical information he put into a historical novel, which is a trilogy, and he's just come out recently with his second volume entitled Kedesha, spelled Kedesha, and it's in English. You can get it online. You want to explore more, you want to look him up on kabbalove.org, KABALOVE.org. Ohad, we've had some interesting, wonderful conversations in the last couple of weeks in preparation for today. Welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ray. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Right now he's in Estonia.
I am, yeah.
After having taught some of his international teaching on sexuality. What is missing from my history books as I grew up was any sort of sense of what was going on around sexuality and spirituality as we go back 10,000 plus years or around that time. And you're familiar with what was happening in some areas of the Middle East. Maybe tell us a little bit about your trilogy, but I'd love for you to go into the historical basis that you integrated into these stories.
Yeah, sure. So, when we spoke about the split between sexuality and spirituality, and I told you that this split was not always there. We were talking about Tantra and other traditions that are trying to gap the split, and I told you that yes, it's very important, but it's also very important to know that the split was not always there. In fact, it's human-made split connected to the current culture, which the current culture is of several thousand years old, and it was gradually taking place around the planet. But it's important to know that before that and through that gradual taking over of the planet, there were always places and ancient traditions that were, really, really ancient, like of thousands and some, I want to believe even tens of thousands of years. Of course, not the same thing, but the idea of celebrating life and death as a circle, the cycle of life and death, healing, death, birth, and rebirth, with the power of life force that's connected to subtle energies, which we connect to the divine forces, to the gods, goddesses, deities, and even beyond that, to subtler and subtler aspects until you come to the source. For most of human history, it was not divided between spirit and sex. Actually, sex was, except of being a way to make children and to relax the body and connect in a family way, connect to your beloved. Except of that, sex was for thousands of years a way of worship, one of the ways of worship. And if you went to the temples of Astarte, that's the name in English, and it's the way we say it in Hebrew. Her name is Ashteret. The way the Bible called her is Ashtoret, but that's kind of a derogative. The way the Persian people called her was Istihar. The word star actually come from her, Istar, and she was connected to the Venus star, and the star of 8 corners. And the word star in English came from that, from Istar, the goddess of the star. Anyhow, she was the goddess of passion, creativity, sexuality, as a way of celebrating life and connecting to the divine. And this, what we don't know, and this is what basically created my first book of the trilogy, Kedesha trilogy, is that this was celebrated in Jerusalem. King Solomon, according, and I'm not inventing anything, it's not even something esoteric knowledge that was found somewhere, someone channeled it. It's like, just go to the Bible, and the key is to read the Bible, the Old Testament, to read it in a critical eye, which means to read the report and know that there is a person with an agenda who's reporting. So in the Book of Kings, it speaks about King Solomon, praising King Solomon to be the wisest man on earth, being very literate very knowledgeable in the wisdom of Mesopotamia, like Assyria and Persia and India and Egypt. So he was kind of holding the ancient knowledge. Israel is just in the center. So all the caravans that were going between Mesopotamia and Egypt passed through Israel, and that's a great place to sit if you're a wisdom seeker. All the dervishes, all the wise people, they're just going through you. If they know that the king is paying for knowledge, they would come. So he's known as the wisest person, but he's known also for being a very sexual person, without apology. So according to the Book of Kings, he had a harem of 1,000 women, which is like, but the thing is not that. The thing is that he was a mystic. He was into sexuality. He built the temple for God, the God of the Hebrews, Yahweh. But in the book of Kings, it says that he also built a temple for Astarte in Jerusalem. But the book of Kings, the author of the book sees it as his sin. And of course says, like, you know, it's because of his women. His women, they took him off the right path of God. But if you filter that, the personal opinions of the writer, and what you have is like a king who is a mystic, who is into mysticism and sexuality, who builds a temple for the goddess of sexuality in Jerusalem. And now if you follow the book, so King Solomon built it, and then you have the description in the book of Kings 2, chapter 22-23, is the whole saga that I described in the book Kedesha, in the first volume, where this temple of Astarte was destroyed by the monotheistic revolution of King Josiah, 300 years later. 300 years of a temple that is in the middle of Jerusalem, as functioning as a main temple. So you come to Jerusalem, and there is first of all, it's a pluralistic city. There are different temples in Jerusalem. King Solomon himself built also other temples. So it's a pluralistic city supported by the kings. You can have different worships, but one of them is to the goddess of sexuality and fertility. The priestesses of the goddess were called Kedesha. The name of my trilogy, Kedesha, is actually the name of the priestesses, meaning sacred woman. In Hebrew, kadosh means sacred, and Kedesha is a woman who is sacred. So the Kedeshas were the priestesses in the temple of Ashteret, of Astarte, Istar. And part of their rituals were sexual rituals. Not all the Kedeshas work with sexual rituals. It's like if we look at the vast knowledge that temples needed to have, they needed to have dancers and musicians and people who are specified in herbs and healing and all kind of things. But we know that the Kedesha specifically were persecuted later because they were sexual priestesses. So there are documentations of sexual rituals that were done by the king and the priestesses in order to create a fertile year. So for instance, there's this is from the Canaanites that were in Israel, in the land of Israel before even King Solomon. So there is a description that was found on a clay that the king, in order to bless the coming year with fertility, there was a ceremony done in the beginning of the year, which is where the Jewish New Year is in the fall before the rain starts in Israel. So they wanted the year to be rainy, and they would do a ceremony. In this ceremony, the king needed to make love with two Kedeshas. Each of them was embodying a specific deity. And he needed to make love with them so well that they will both be totally satisfied. And if they are both totally satisfied, that would, create the year fertility. The interesting anecdote, the Jews don't eat meat and milk, right? They don't mix meat and milk. I don't know if you know, but it's like what's considered kosher is like don't mix meat and milk. In this ritual, according to these ancient writings, and we're talking, some thousands of years ago, it says that in order to help the king be so fertile and not viral, what's the word in English? Vital, yeah. He had to eat all kind of special foods like aphrodisiacs, and one of them was actually a kid in his mouth in milk, like they were cooking a goat kid in milk. And then, according to this, when you read the Torah that says, don't cook a goat kid with his mother's milk, then you understand, like, okay, that's what they were talking about. You know, when you're doing this ritual, don't cook it with its mother's milk. So the rituals of sacred sexuality were so embedded in the culture. And so that was between the priestesses and the king, but we also know about Kedeshas that are just accepting individuals. You just come to the temple, you bring a goat as an offering or something, you bring something as an offering, and you meet a Kedesha, which is a sacred priestess, and she might make love with you. She might, as we know from today, if someone is a sexual shaman, she's not a prostitute. You're not buying sex service. You're buying healing. Or you're giving the goat, you're offering something, and you're getting a session of healing. And the session of healing could be also by running eros in your body and riding sexuality, but might be through other things. So these were the ancient times, and in those traditions, the split between sexuality and spirituality was not there. It's so hard for us to understand, because today, I think when people, and I was a rabbi, as you said in your introduction, was a Kabbalist Rabbi, and for us Jews, and of course for Christians and Muslims, if you come to God, you shouldn't be coming, horny with passion, sexual passion. Actually, if you're Christian, you might think that sexual passion is from Satan. If you're Jewish, you just think it's not so respectful for God. But for the ancient people, that was God itself. And the Greek people called Eros. Eros is a deity. So when I am erotic, I'm actually embodying the divine, a divine power, a deity. It's hard for us to think about it. And I always tell people, even tantric people or whatever it is, when you think about a holy man or a holy woman or a sacred person, do you think about them as someone who has a lot of sex or very little sex, if at all? And they would always see it as someone who, either is celibate or having very minimal sex, because they don't think about someone who's holy. If they're holy, how could they be very sexual and having lots of sex? But that was the ancient mythology and the ancient traditions. Like, yeah, you can be a holy woman, Kedesha, or Kadesh, which was the man. And that's what you do. You work as a sexual being and you offer, but the thing is that so now we go, we can go deeper. It's not just giving sex to people in the way that people think about sex today. I think because of the split in sexuality and spirituality, when people see sex, they see just like sexual intercourse and rubbing organs with each other. And they don't see what the ancient people knew, that it's so much more. It was intuitive for them that rising energy in the body, rising sexual energy in the body can lead you to altered states of, extraordinary awareness and states of consciousness. And from that you connect to the archetypal world, and from the archetypal world you can connect to deep spirit, and then magic can happen and healing can happen. Yeah, so we can talk about it more and more. I just like want to give you a place to.
Yeah, all right, I understand. I first came into some sort of an awareness of this perspective when I was I envisioned, edited, contributed to, and published a book called Women of the Light about 30 years ago.
Yeah, I know this book.
Subtitled the New Sacred Prostitute. I use the term the New Sacred Prostitute because I had asked a number of I chose to just focus on women who were doing sexual activities for others, but they were very aware of energy and their spiritual focus, even though it may not be religious per se. And I asked many of them, well, how did you come to do this? Because we're talking about, in hippie days, before the hippie days, sexuality was really, 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 really quiet. And the hippie days, they opened up and came the field of Western sexology around 1966 with Mattress and Johnson's The Human Sexual Response. That really opened up the doors in many ways. And then in the early 70s, Tantra, particularly from India, began to be introduced into the West. And so by the time I was entered in the field of human sexuality at the Institute for the Advancement of Human Sexuality, we already had some groundwork, but we were pulling from the past and creating a lot of new things, new approaches that just were not available to us easily in the culture before us, other than sort of symbols from the past. And I asked these particular women, because I chose to focus on women initially, to convey the idea more clearly for people's minds that what was it that inspired you to step into this role of doing sexual, we'll say sexual service type of things, but in a very broad sense. And several of them pointed to the book, Women, the Sacred Prostitute, by Nancy Qualls Corbett, a PhD Jungian analyst. And she had given this scenario, hypothetical, symbolic scenario of warrior coming back from war. First, he goes into the temple, and have to be bathed, fed, spoken to, and made love with, as to wash away the horrors of war. That was the symbolism.
Wash away PTSD of veterans, of war veterans. Yeah. And how amazing would it be if our society knew how to deal with that? And so I started reading, well, at the time it was the goddess literature, and it was around 1980, 1990. The emphasis was that in earlier times, the goddess was the main deity. And later times, the god went from female focus, female deity to male focus. But as I kept reading some of the sources, I began to see, no, there was that blend of male deity, female deity. It wasn't one or the other. There was that blend. So that began to have a sense that, there was something much more inherently integrated before the duality was emphasized more and more and more. And this is an example that you're talking about. I think that's important for us to understand that we here in the 20th, 21st century are just waking up to what has been much more known in some of the ancient cultures,
we're talking, like you said, maybe 5, 10 plus thousand years ago.
No, I mean, yes, but also the temple that I'm speaking about, the temple of Astarte was destroyed in the 7th century BCE. So that's like 2,600 years only.
Okay. All right. So it's more recent then.
Yeah, much more recent. The culture of sacred sexuality was, prevalent for thousands of years before that. But the revolution, I think, most people in the West don't know that monotheism started with the bloody revolution in the 7th century BCE in Jerusalem. There was a conspiracy happening. The wise man, his name was Shaman. He was the scribe, Shaman the scribe. That's how they call him. Probably bribed some people. Someone murdered the king. King Amun was murdered when his son was only 7 years old. The scribe took the son, made him king when he was 7 years old, crowned him as king, and educated him. Very noble of him, huh? And of course, when he educated him, the king, he educated him according to his beliefs, not according to his father's beliefs. His father and his grandfather were actually people who brought the union of the feminine and masculine together. Like the grandfather of this young boy king is King Menashe, the king that ruled over Jerusalem for the longest time. And he is known as a sinner in the Bible because he brought the goddess image of Asherah into the temple of Yahweh. Maybe he thought that they need to sleep together, not to be in, a temple for her, a temple for him, but actually, hey, you need to be together in the same temple. So the Jews hate him. So he died, his son became king, his son was murdered, leaving the boy. The boy was educated by the scribe that was actually per se, the one who ruled the kingdom. And then when the boy was in his 20s, it's been described in the Book of Kings how they go and they do some renovation in the temple of Yahweh, and all of a sudden they find a book, and the high priest comes like, "Hey, we found a book that we didn't know about it, an ancient book, looks like a book of Moses." Shaphan reads it and confirms, yes, this is an ancient book of Moses, and he gives it to the king. And the king reads it and says like, "Wow, we didn't know, because in this book it says you shouldn't have any other temple for any other deities, only to me. You should destroy all the other temples, break the altars, kill those who worship other gods and goddesses." And then the 20-something years old king reads it out loud, tears his clothes, and said like, "We didn't know, we need," and the scribe is, encouraging him to make a revolution. And he takes the army, and he's supported by the people who were, by the mob kind of thing, and they destroy the temple of Astarte that King Solomon built 300 years before. They burn it to the ashes. Not only it, but different all over the kingdom, altars that were for the goddess were burnt. It says that some of them were made into toilets to make fun of it and to put it down. So they made it into shit houses. They sometimes burnt the corpse of the priests and priestesses murdered. They burnt their bodies on the broken altars. So they basically were like, we want to destroy this culture and traumatize the people. And that's what happened. So the worship of sexuality, or the worship of the goddess that included sexuality as a sacred offering, was just cut off. And since then, that was the very beginning of what later became Judaism. That we have one God, and of course, he's a male characteristics. Jews would not say that God is a male, but they would say God has no gender. But definitely, all the characteristics of the God in the Bible are of a male God, and there is no female. While actually, if you go in archaeology in the land of Israel, and there were several places that found evidence of our ancestors writing to each other and blessing each other to Yahweh ve'asherato, which means to God, the masculine God, and his goddess and his consort. So our ancestors actually worshipped a god and a goddess union, a sacred union. That was the divine for them. If this is just like from simple archaeological findings in the land of Judea. But this is hidden, and then the monotheistic religions created it as if, from days of Abraham, we were just like monotheistic. Monotheism was there forever, and there were some sinners that did the opposite, but and that's totally not true. So yeah, I took the liberty to tell the story in my book in Kedesha, to research a lot in archaeology and literature and history and mythology, and understand the different theologies of the different groups, the religious groups that, each of them believed in God in a different way. And what does it mean actually to have a temple, that like a real temple, that is dedicated to sexuality, to love, to the goddess, which means also to the cycle of women bleeding with the moon, with this, what kind of ceremonies were there? How did they respect the moon and the goddess and the women and the sex between the people? So I needed to really go into that and write the story, because for me, these kings murdered my friends. They murdered the people that I would have been part of. And our story was not told. Our story was told by the winners. History is told by the winners. And until this day, people just don't know what happened. So I felt a sacred oath almost to tell the story. And yeah, so I'm really happy, many people read it and they say it's a page turner, like it's because it has everything, it has blood, it has revolution, it has sex, it has all the good stuff. It has the villains, and it has the sexy priestesses and everything. But you learn the history of sexuality and spirituality and the split between them and how it happened and when it happened based on historical resources.
Great. So if you're interested in going more deeply into this story, Kedesha, Kedesha, is available in book form by Ohad Pele. So
yeah, I'd like to talk, or maybe this, I guess it's the next section, but I want to talk about, what is the healing that Kedeshas can offer, and what is sexual healing, and how is it, healing what we call today trauma. They didn't have this term, of course.
right.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah, I have to say that the research, my research started with books, but at a certain point I felt like, okay, knowledge is not in the books. Knowledge is in the experience, and I need to go get the experience and really search for what it is, so I know it in my body and not only in my mind. Appreciating the mind a lot, but it can't do the whole thing.
What's happening today? How do we approach this? You want to give a context for this and give us a sense of your perspective on what we can do and where perhaps we could go for those of us who into transformation?
Yeah, well, that's the main question, of course. So what do we do with it today? And of course, we need to heal the split, because we can't, it's like we can't play the flute if it's broken, if the human body is a flute, and and every chakra is one of those holes of the flute, and you have a blockage in the flute that doesn't allow energy to flow from through all the flute, then of course it can't play. So integrating and recreating the connection between spirit and sex is absolutely important and meaningful for, and you said at the beginning, it's a political thing. I totally see it as a political thing. I see it as something that will, when people are more integrated in their spirituality and sexuality, they're less, they would less go into war. They would less be just soldiers obeying citizens of some leaders that are, taking them according to some agenda. They will be more integrated, more sovereign being. They would be more ready to have independent thinking and feeling and sourcing from the source and not from a leader. And that's, of course, something that leaders don't like, because they like the people to go after them. So I see our work actually as, whatever you want to call us, sexual shamans or whatever it is. I don't really care about the title. But I see our work in empowering people and helping them claim back their sovereignty, their power. It's really not about having good sex. I think a lot of Tantra in the West became like, okay, let me teach you how to have more pleasure, how to have good sex with your wife or husband, which, it's good, but I don't see our work in this. I see my work as using what we know about sexuality, which is an immense power. This is a life force. This is what creates babies. This is what rejuvenate the body. And everybody knows how they feel after a good lovemaking and orgasm. And it's just like the life force that is coming and the joy. It makes people alive. And you see people that they don't have it. They don't have orgasmic life. They're dim and bitter. So I see my work as actually giving people back their power and their freedom and their sovereignty and their ability to source from the source, to resource themselves, not from each other, not to be predators of energy from each other. It doesn't, people talk about today a lot about sexual predators, but it's not that. They're energy predators that are just like sucking from each other and trying to get power from each other. And a lot of it is actually by all kind of means that are draining each other. And this is really, really important in community, that we know how to resource ourselves from the source. And I think that the real work of a Kedesha or Kadesh or, a sexual shaman is really not just to have good sex with people or to teach them how to have good sex. I mean, it's a byproduct. The real work is to open the channels so they can go deep into themselves and be weaned off what Kabbalah calls the illusionary vision of reality, and starting to see reality from a deeper perspective. And it's really feeling it from within. It's hard to speak about it because it's like speaking about the taste of something that people, if you didn't taste it, it's hard to describe. But there is sexuality. I look at sexuality as a doorway, as a portal. And it's a beautiful portal, and many people just come to this portal, to this gate, take pictures, and it's like, oh, that's a beautiful place. But they never fucking pass through. Sexuality is a thing to move through, and when you move through, you're moving into the palace of the divine, I would say. You can maybe use different names for that, but I'm coming from this kind of mythology. I know that when I go deep into sex through deepening the consciousness in the sexual encounter, whether it's with oneself or with another person, with two people, with group sex, it really doesn't matter. What matters is not what you do, but how you do it, and where is your awareness. And you can go to it just like people go to medicine ceremonies. For me, sex is medicine. And the same as, like, you don't drink medicine, you don't drink ayahuasca because it's tasty. It's not. Sex is tasty, but you drink from the cup of sex because you want to have a journey. You want to go into altered states, to extraordinary ways of being, in which you might realize who you are in a deeper way. The whole picture of who I am will change, will shift. And that also creates healing. And again, today there's a lot of therapeutic language that came on stage, and it's good because therapy is beautiful. What I don't like is that when one language is kind of taking over. And I feel like today the therapeutic language took over. Finally, they, for 100 years since Freud, psychology was kind of fighting for its legitimacy. And now it's so legit that it's really like taking over, and like everything needs to be therapeutic and held in a safe space of therapy, and all the guidelines of therapy are projected on anything. But I know that sexual shamans in the past and in the future and in the present work with a deeper aspect than normal therapy, I would say, because it's using eros in order to connect a person to the source of life, to this part of us that is never broken. So you take a broken person, let's say what you quoted from the Sacred Prostitute, this image of the soldiers that are coming back from war, and they've seen all the atrocities and their friends being, killed and slaughtered and all the atrocities of war. And I come from Israel, so we know a little bit about that. And then instead of just sending them back home to their children and their wives, no, the sacred Kedesha, the priestesses are taking them. And they do with them not therapy, but they will connect them back to the source of life through sexual experience, erotic experience. In this, they might cry, they might release trauma from their muscles and from their body and from their emotions. They will guide them through all kinds of things, but the main thing is to resource them from this vibration that lies underneath everything that can be broken. I can't go into the terminology of Kabbalah, but in Kabbalah we have this thing that even when someone's psyche is broken, there is a level inside that was not cracked. And if we reach this level, from that, if we shine this, if we vibrate that, even though it's hidden, it's subtle, but it's nevertheless so powerful that it can create a way that a person can carry their wounds with dignity. So even if it's PTSD from war, it's not that you forget everything, but you can merge back into society and carry your memories and carry everything with dignity. It's not breaking you. So it's a little bit different than, classical therapy, but there are different therapeutic benefits to that. And not only therapeutic, because as we spoke before, the sacred Kedeshas were also working on fertility of the land, and, things that we would call sex magic and stuff like that. So the question today is, how do we do that? How do we bring it back? First, I want to say I don't have the answers. As a rabbi, I'm sometimes good with good questions. One of the things that I learned in traditional learning is like sometimes having good questions is better than having shallow answers. So, but I think the good questions are, can we mend the split, the tearing of the tissue in our psyche between the higher and the lower, between spirit and sex? Can we actually have sex that is vibrating like a prayer? Mystics knew about it all the time. In all kind of cultures, including in my culture, in Kabbalah, there are writings about sexuality that is prayer, and prayer that is sexual. But can we actually bring people to that place? Can we have priests and priestesses that are trained enough to know when to move aside? This is how I see it. It's like, if the priestess is coming and working with someone, and this someone obviously is, falling in love with her, wanting her, but that would be a missing of the point. She wants him to, it's like she's throwing her bait, so to say, to his life force, and his life force is taking the bait, and she pulls him up, but then she moves away, and all the oxytocin in his body is like waiting, looking for her, but she's not physically there, and energetically she's not standing there. She allows this oxytocin to be directed towards the source. That's what we want. We want people to be able to connect to the source of life, to God, Goddess, whatever you want to call it, but to be able to connect erotically to life itself. If we don't connect erotically to life itself, we constantly seek for it by sexual partners. But if we connect erotically to life itself, we know how to, sit by the beach and breathe the waves in an erotic way and move energy through our bodies and connect to the life force in nature, or sit in the desert, or look at the stars, or sit by a tree and recharge, also erotically. So how to educate priests and priestesses, I think this is one of the, for me, this is one of the big questions. Because for sure, in the ancient temples, to become a priest or a priestess, you needed a lot of education. People lived in the temple, sometimes years, learning how to dance, how to pray, how to arrange the altar, how to touch someone, how to sing, how to arouse them, how to work with your own sexual energy. That, you know, there's so much. And I really wonder, how can we create a school? You know, ISTA is called the School of Temple Arts, and I love what ISTA is doing, what we are doing in ISTA. And I know that it's not enough, actually. It's just the beginning. But if we want to create temples, new temples, we need to find a way to educate people that will go deep enough. And deep is what I find frustrating sometimes with Western Tantra, is that it's not deep enough.
Yes.
That it's just like on the shallow level of how do you call it? Just having better life, having the good life, selling the American dream, so to say, and which is definitely not what it's about.
Yeah. So we sort of, since we do not have the answer, but we're exploring it. I think we have some directions. What you're doing and what I'm doing and many others are doing are heading in that. But I agree, we have to go deeper. And one of the ways I would conceptualize it is a lot of Western Tantra, the language was around more ecstasy. And I said, you know, that's good, but what I'm really searching for, seeking, is more transformation. And when I shift to the consciousness of transformation, ecstasy can happen along the way, but it's not the objective. If it happens, awesome. It's about opening up so that there's more vibrancy within our energetic functioning, and knowing that we don't have the answers, but headed in the direction of the answers.
We need more people to ask the good questions and to go by error and try and error and compare. It took thousands of years to make us forget it. Let us give ourselves, you know, some decades to remember.
Great. Well, Ohad, thank you so much for giving us some history, raising the question, and pointing in a direction. Very much appreciate your exploration of the questions here. It's important to have those questions. So we don't have the answers fully, and we can go deeper. So that's where I'm playing with as well.
Yeah, I know that, and that's why I so appreciate your work, Ray.
Thank you. You can learn more, study more with Ohad at Kabbalove, KABALOVE.org.
Yeah, there's a course in Kabbalah there, you know, that people can actually, if they want to know what I'm talking about in Kabbalah, there's an online course.
Great. And his trilogy of 2 volumes, which are completed, Kedesha, Kedesha. And thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you, Ray.
I'm Kenneth Ray Stubbs. If you want to know more about other podcasts, sexualshaman.com. If you want to contribute to this free podcast, videocast, push a little button and be a patron. I think it'd be greatly appreciated. And again, the sponsor for this is my particular training called the Energy Training, which is described also in sexualshaman.com. And we continue the journey to deepen what we can be. I think is inherent in our nature as a conscious, energetic being. So we will continue on exploring this in our personal lives, and encourage people who are listening to go there for yourself, whatever that might be for you at this point in time. Step out of the mold. So, folks, have a good day. And Ohad, thank you again for joining in.
You're welcome, and thank you.